Hey everybody, welcome back. We've got quite a bit of ground to cover this week to give you all of the tools that you're going to need to complete your assignment and to keep our progress on track. So in this first video, I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter and maybe break these videos apart into individual topics this week. So let me know what you think about that. If you like that, or if you'd rather I do kind of like last week where it was just one or two longer videos where everything was connected together. I'll let you guys have a little bit of say there, so make sure to let me know, give me a shout out. In the meantime though, our first thing that we need to cover this week is how we work with SeekBars. Now a SeekBar is a UI element that allows the user to scrub progress. You guys have used them a bazillion times in applications. I mean, if we were to draw a little sample UI component here. So if here is our apps here, wow, I'm not drawing an iPhone here. Let's do this the right way. Anyways, we've got here's our device and here's our app. A SeekBar is one of those bars where you've got a little dot on it and you can slide it back and forth to control progress through something. Typically like you'll use those a lot like with movies or media files or other things like that. That's a SeekBar because it allows the user control movement. And that value is reported back to you in typically in a percentage from 0 to 100. Though you can customize that, but usually it's easier to leave the range alone and then use some math to adjust to what you need for a range rather than try to change the ranges of the SeekBar itself. Especially if you make fairly small ranges, weird things happen. And it's harder for you to get, partial pieces versus you'll get a lot more accurate results typically leaving it at a 0 to 100 and then just using math to make adjustments. But the first thing we want to do is talk about how do we implement a SeekBar. As well as do a little bit more practice with two-fragment communication. That's kind of a tricky idea, and a few of you guys were struggling with that last week still. But let's look at that again. So what I've got here is just a brand new project, just an empty project. I haven't done anything to it first. Just opened it up to begin with. And the first thing we're going to do in this particular project is we are going to come in and we are going to make a couple of new fragments. Well, let's just make one blank fragment for now. And I'm going to call this fragment seek. Making sure to uncheck again our factory methods and our callbacks because we don't need those for what we're working on right now. We're going to hit finish. There we go. It took a sweet time to get there, but we got there in the end. So here we go. We have a fragment. The part that we're going to care about first off, though, is in our UI components of this bar. I'm going to introduce that idea of being able to put in a SeekBar. Now, for you guys as assignment, you'll need to be able to have more than just a SeekBar in this fragment. So let's go ahead and change this guy to a linear layout instead of a frame layout and give ourselves a vertical orientation. Or a horizontal. I mean, you guys are going to have to figure that out. I'm just going to start with this for now. And this is one of those few times when, for example, the design view can kind of help us out a little bit. It'll allow us to easily drop the basics of a SeekBar in place. Here we go. And we can drop our SeekBar into the fragment. And it also has the text underneath it from before, but we can get rid of that. We don't need it either. So we have our SeekBar in place with the default ID. Our width is matching the parent, and our height is wrapping the content. So as you can see, we can just simply have a SeekBar that goes all the way across our screen. It might be, maybe we want to add a little bit of padding to, the sides of it, some margin. Those things are fine too. You guys could do that if you don't want to make it go the whole thing, but I want to kind of stay to the point here with this video. So we've got ourselves a SeekBar on screen on our layout. Now we want to work with that SeekBar inside of our fragment. Now the most important thing with a SeekBar, if we pull up the documentation of it here, is this nested interface, which is the on SeekBar change listener. This interface defines a series of methods that will be called as the user is working through or working with the SeekBar. Now that is, first off, we have an on-progress change, which changes as the bar moves. We also have the touch and the start touch and the stop touch. Both of these give us a notification the user has touched the little dot and is about to scrub, or stopped touching the dot. So that way, for example, if you wanted to pause your video while the user scrubs, and once they start touching it, you would pause, get progress changes, and you could skip forward or backwards or wherever you needed to the right place, and then as soon as they stopped, you could resume playing, for example. Really, these are the three methods that you need, and you do have to implement all of them because this is an interface. But really, the only one we're going to care about from this particular week is when the progress itself has changed. So if we go back to Android Studio, we have our SeekBar. It's going to be inside this fragment, but we need a reference to it if we are going to work with it. I'm going to just call mine SeekBar. Oops. Okay. And so now we need to get a copy of this SeekBar itself. Which, if you do, as we've done in the past, we can do, again, a private. In fact, that SeekBar should be private as well. Private view of our root. That way we can have a reference to work with. All right. And now let's get ourselves an event we can work with. Let's do generate, override methods, to on resume. There we go. And now we can get a reference to our SeekBar. And let's populate it. Equals root, oops, cast, SeekBar, and then root dot find view by ID r dot id dot seek. Okay, this is all pretty similar stuff to what we've done in weeks past. We've put something in our UI. We've now holding a reference to it within our fragment so that we can now do things with that SeekBar. Specifically, what we really care about is on this SeekBar, we want to set the on SeekBar change listener. And at this point, we have two different options when we can do that on change listener. If we wanted to implement the interface directly to this fragment seek and have those methods called here, we could do that, or we can do an anonymous inner class as we've done in the weeks past. I think an anonymous inner class, again, is an easy way to go about it. So we've got our three methods. Again, we don't care about either of these two, so I'm going to go ahead and collapse them because we don't care about start tracking touch or stop tracking touch. What we really want to know is be able to see when the user is changing the bar. So for just to begin with, we're going to do a log.d to get a debug message out. And let's say SeekBar change. And we can get a copy of the value because that is returned as an integer to us in progress. Now that's an important thing to note here for just a moment. This is one of the primary reasons we often leave things at their default 0 to 100 and then use math to manipulate in there to our ranges, to compensate, for example, if you wanted to go 5 to 25. Because if I set the SeekBar itself 5 to 25, I will have very discrete notches because I'm only capable of receiving an integer, versus if I have an integer that says 0 to 100% and then I now modify that to support the range that I need to support, then I would get a much more granular control of that range when we did the math versus if I try to hard code it in the SeekBar itself. So that's part of the reason why you're better off typically to go the full range, the default range, and then just use math to make changes to your range from there. The last thing we need to do before we can run this thing is we have our main activity. We need to attach that fragment inside of our main activity. So let's put I'm going to put a frame layout here. And let's say we want the width to match the parent and the height to wrap the content. And let's give it an ID so we can target it. And let's call this frag1. So then in our frame activity, we can get our fragment manager. Remember to work with the support fragment manager. And it imported the wrong one. Let's re-import that guy and get the right version of it. There we go. And let's say fm.begin transaction. And let's add that fragment. Let's see here. Whoa, give me the add. All right. So the first thing we need to know is where do I want to put this particular fragment. So in this case, I want to put it in r.id.frag1. The fragment I want is a new fragment seek. And let's give it a tag so we can find it later. Let's call this frag seek. Let's maybe move these down a line so you guys can see it a little bit easier. And then we need to do .commit. All right. So this will add our fragment to the bar or to the application, so that we can now see our SeekBar. Sorry, I forgot to boot up the emulator before I started recording, as you can well tell. There we go, installing APK. We're making progress, we're almost there. So here's our fragment here, again with just a SeekBar that we can scrub and back and forth and side to side as we go along. And we should be able to come down to our log now, and if we do a filter for our test, we should see our SeekBar now changing values as we go along. 25, 26, 27, 28, or we can skip and watch those things change in real time. You can see that. I'll scroll now as we go. That our SeekBar is working. So we're getting communication here to our SeekBar, and we're getting those integers to notify us that the SeekBar itself is changing. However, if you've skipped ahead a little bit and you've looked at the assignment for this week, and this is part of the reason why we're choosing to use the SeekBar here, is one of the goals for this assignment, and again, I know this is a totally cheesy example, but again, the things we really cared about practicing, this assignment will help you kind of stretch your skills a little bit with designing interfaces, with testing with fragments, and now adding a couple of new twists that you're going to see this week that will come. But we're going to have two fragments to begin with, one with a SeekBar in it, and then with a text field. Just for this example today, your assignment will actually have a little bit more than that. But let's imagine now, I want to take this SeekBar, for example, and have it control calculating taxes. Let's assume this is the tax rate here, is in our SeekBar, and then our total now needs to receive the value from our SeekBar, multiply it by the amount, and put in some piece of text. So we're going to need to define another fragment as well as some interfaces that allow us to call methods to implement communication between these two. Okay, again, because that was something I've seen a little bit of concern still with some of your submissions so far. Remember, the main activity is only there to orchestrate. It should not be involved in the logic. The logic belongs in the fragments, and then the main activity just orchestrates things. So for example, in what we have so far, anything that I need to do related to that SeekBar's progress is going to be inside this fragment. However, I'm going to eventually need to communicate that progress to the other fragment, which means this guy will send a message to the activity saying, hey, my SeekBar changed, and then the activity will then send it to the appropriate place, which would be our other fragment. So let's go ahead and make that second fragment right now. Make another blank fragment. Let's call this guy fragment amount. Just for giggles and grins. There we go. Implement another blank basic fragment. This guy doesn't really do anything, but it will, okay? What we need first, though, is we've got our two fragments. So I've got fragment seek and I've got fragment and amount, and I need to make these guys communicate to each other. I want seek to be able to send a message to the activity, and the activity to then forward that to the fragment amount, okay? So seek is going to need to implement a interface, as we've seen in the weeks past. Oops. So let's define ourselves an inner interface, and let's call this one on seek changed. How about? And we'll have a, well, public's moot, a void, because it doesn't need to return anything, a method called on seek update, which will then send as a parameter an integer for our value. Okay? Our main activity is going to need to implement this method because when we're going to, again, inside of our onAttach, like we've done in weeks past, we're going to generate our override for onAttach. Again, choosing the deprecated onAttach activity on purpose in this case. And let's write ourselves a attachment. Let's make sure. And we're going to want a private variable of onSeekChanged. And let's call this mCallback, as we've done in the past. Sorry, I'm wearing a wrist brace. I sprained my wrist, and it's making it really hard to type. So let's try attaching that. Let's say mCallback is equal to and cast to our onSeekChanged activity. Let's find out, does this guy actually able to do that? If it's not, then we want to catch a cast exception. And let's throw a new version, class cast. Let's do our activity dot toString. Must implement the onSeekChanged interface. Okay. So we've got our attachment now. So when our fragment attaches to the main activity, we'll either get an error if we haven't implemented this interface, or otherwise I will now have a guaranteed ability to call the methods defined in this interface with my mCallback. So in my activity now, again, let's implement our onSeekChanged for fragment seek. We can hit Alt-Enter and let it type out the necessary methods for us so we don't have to worry about it. And there we go. We now have the ability for our main activity to get the value from our fragment from the seek. In fact, we can see that now. If instead of now of logging here in our onProgressChanged, let's change that. Let's have it call mCallback.onSeekUpdate and send it the progress value. And then let our logging take place here, since our other fragment's not ready yet for us to forward the message on to it. Sure. Okay. And now again, if we run this, if everything's working, we should see our SeekBar changing, just as we thought we would. Okay. All right, now notice that skips a little bit here. That's because the user is moving faster than the choreographer is able to keep up with frames. So the SeekBar movement trumps drawing every single frame and every SeekBar change. So you can't guarantee that you'll smoothly go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way to your end value. But it will be the calculated value of whatever your limits are based on its position between those two limits. Anyway, so now we have our SeekBar able to communicate to us. Okay. So we have a progress value here, which is going to give us a number. And now we have another fragment. And in this fragment, is what I want to do here for this guy is let's have a text field, okay, that allows us to now, do some calculation on here. Let's say width is wrap. We're going to change this a little bit. And let's go linear layout, except this time I want them to be orientation, horizontal. So I want, because I'm going to have two text views side by side. This first one is going to say amount. All right, and then again, we got to extract that string resource. There we go. And let's make ourselves a second text view here. And let's give it an amount, an ID value now. ID text amount. And we don't want a string value in this one because we're going to fill it in. Okay? Because the idea here, again, that we have one fragment that's controlling it and some calculation now, so we can put it on the screen. So in our fragment amount, we need our private private view root, and root equals. So we can now come into here and do our override public on resume. Oops. Void. Okay. And now we need to do super dot on resume. There we go. We could have just generated it, but just so you can see that it doesn't really matter either way. So now we need to get a reference to that text field that we want to populate with. So private, and let's call it text view, txt amount. There we go. Okay, text view, text amount. And as what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and text amount equals text view root dot find view by ID r dot ID dot text amount, just like we've done before. Okay, so now the fragment has a reference to a field for that amount, to that text field. But again, even if we run this, well, I guess we better add it too, huh? Shouldn't we? Let's put it first here. Let's get another frame layout. Let's call this one frag 2. And maybe we should set these guys both to 0 DPs, 0 DP, and give a layout weight. Why aren't you letting me give it a layout weight? That was really strange. Never had it do that to me before. Oh, it's probably because I didn't fit in the 0 DP up here. So it was because I was editing down below. That was my fault, actually. Makes you feel sheepish. All right. Again, now let's add that guy here to our chain. Let's add now to r.id.frag2 a new fragment amount. And let's call this one frag amount. There we go. Now we should get our two fragments on the screen. Okay. Now you'll notice these two are stacking on top of each other, and I left this as an error on purpose because there's a good likelihood that you guys will run into this problem when you're doing your own homework assignment. So I want you to take just a second and pause and ask yourself, why are they on top of each other? Why aren't they spread out? You know, why aren't they using weights of half and half for the height, like we said? Okay. Okay, the reason being, we still are using a constraint layout here. And I don't have any constraints to position it, so let's set ourselves a linear layout with an orientation now of vertical. And now we should have them so they're no longer on top of each other. But notice, even as I'm still scrolling, I'm getting my SeekBar value here down in my logcat, sorry, I'm pointing at the screen with my finger like you guys can actually see it. So my seek value is moving, but my text field isn't updating. Now, why do you think that is? I mean, we declared an interface, and I'm sending this message here to my main activity, but hopefully you noticed we've never told our main activity to do anything with it. So our orchestrator here, our activity, is getting this value and going, cool, logging it and moving on. What we want to do rather is we need to get a hold of it, this fragment amount now, and then have this fragment amount be updated. Okay, so this fragment amount is going to need a method in here that we can call public void, let's call this update tax rate, since that's what your SeekBar is going to do. Rate. And I'm going to do, just for now, for very simple to begin with, we're going to do is just a set text on that. And we are going to do rate. We're going to lazy man turn that into a string. We could do, you know, a proper parsing of it. But again, a different issue for another day. It's also going to complain to you that we shouldn't, you know, concatenate inside of set text because it's really slow. Rather, we should use, you know, proper programming text or techniques, you know, with placeholders inside of our string resources. But for something like what we're doing here, just quick and dirty, that it's kind of silly to do that. Oops, that shouldn't be uppercase either. So let's update. Now on our main activity, we need to call that method with our value. Now notice, when I try to call this method, it says, hey, I don't know what update tax rate is. That's because this method doesn't exist inside of my main activity. It exists within my fragment for the amount. So we're going to need to get a reference to that fragment amount. Okay? So let's get ourselves a variable to hold it in. Amount. Frag amount. Sure. And we can do fragment amount equals, in fact, why don't we move this fragment manager up here so we can access it without having to re-pull it from the activity again. Private fragment manager FM. There we go. So now down here we can say fm.find fragment by tag, and we gave it the tag of frag amount. So that now we can say fragment amount dot update tax rate. Let's cast this guy to fragment amount. There we go. Okay. Let's get this so you can see. There we go. So we're getting a reference to the fragment. Okay. And then we're going to update our tax rate so that we can see that text field should just change to show us, for now, the SeekBar's value. So we can see that that value is there. You know, maybe we wanted instead to have it show up as currency, in which case we would probably be best to use some big decimals, because they'll allow us, you know, if you should remember these from previous Java classes, allow us to represent the numbers we're going to work with money pretty accurately, unlike other data types we have to work with. Because currency does not play well with doubles because it has too many limitations in the values that it's capable of storing. So rather, you're best to use a big decimal. So let's make two, a couple of them. We're going to call it rate equals new big decimal, and we can have that be formed from our rate that we have up here. I guess we can't call it BD rate. How about that? Okay, big decimal BD amount, new big decimal. And now this would be whatever amount we're wanting to multiply by. In this case, I don't know, let's do $7.67. That's the cost of the burrito I just bought for dinner from Beto's on my way up to record these videos for you guys this evening. And then we need one more big decimal for our BD final amount, which is going to be our BD rate, and we want to multiply that by our BD amount. Okay, now again, because we're in Java, overloaded operators don't really exist like they do in other languages like C and C++. So we have to use the .multiply method to allow us to multiply these two the big data decimal type together. Now this BD final value will now hold the result of multiplying 767 by whatever our rate is. So if it's a small tax rate, that's going to be a reasonable price. But once our tax rate starts hitting 10, 50, 60, 70%, that's going to be one really expensive burrito. But we want to be able to put that on the screen. Okay, so rather than just showing the user our tax rate now, maybe we want to be able to show them this final thing. However, we should want it to look like money, right? So the easiest way to do that is to use a number format. Okay. Now notice there's several of them. Let's go ahead and bring in java.text to work with. We don't need the Android ICU package. That one adds a lot of overhead that doesn't really play well with text views. So java.text is best. And let's call this guy num format. Okay, and the way we're going to get that is by calling in number format. We can ask it to give us the currency instance, specifically to the US. Now, Android provides the ability for you to retrieve the one that's default to the device rather than the one for US, but I don't want to get into that overhead for this example. So we're going to, by default, just assume dollars for this particular example within the US. And then we can now just set the text into our text field, .set text. And we can say num format and pass it our BD final. Now, num format does not know how to work with big decimals. However, it does know how to work with doubles. Okay, so by storing things in big decimal and doing the math in big decimal, and then just outputting our value in doubles, we don't suffer the inaccuracies and the data losses that would come if I were storing both pieces in double values. So now, if we run this example one more time. Our amount, you can see is our SeekBar gets to, there you go, 50%. Our burrito now is 383, okay, because that's 50 times 767. That is a really, really expensive burrito. Now, for your assignment, you'll actually want to compensate for the rates of the tax rates properly. So that you're not really doing it, because 50 is not really a 50% now if you do the math, because 1 would be 100%, meaning if I bring my tax rate down here, you can see my amount doubles as soon as I hit 2, because I've doubled my rate. But anyways, hopefully that gets you on the right track and keep going from there. Now this video is kind of getting a little long, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this one here on the SeekBar. And then we're going to go and look into some new issues now that come with specifically rotating our device.